great to be here with you this morning. And today we are in week 4 of our Disciples series. I think we're about to turn the corner where our toes are not getting stepped on quite as much. But I like where we've been in this series. I like where we're heading. So far, though, I hope that if you've been here, we've all seen that to be a Christian means that we must be a disciple of Jesus Christ. Because we can claim the name Christian all day long, but as we've seen, a disciple is someone who is a student, a learner, a follower of Jesus Christ. And so far, we have also seen that perhaps the biggest fault of the church in America over the last 50 years or more, I would say, is that the church hasn't been making disciples and following the full Great Commission. We've made plenty of church members. We've baptized a lot of people in our churches. But if they aren't learning, if they aren't being students, if they aren't followers of Jesus, then in that area we may have failed in some ways. And trust me, even though it may not seem like it, this series is not meant for us to feel negative, to make us feel like failures in any way. What I'm hoping is that this series just opens our eyes to how we can just be better as individuals, better as the church. Today we're going to look at this. The cost of being a disciple. Because there can be a big cost with it. The cost of something. How much are we willing to pay? You know, in America, over the decades, over the years, the cost of living has gone up a lot over the years. In 1972, you could buy gasoline for 36 cents a gallon, just 51 years ago. Now it's over $3.60 in places around here. Check out these prices from a Chicago area newspaper in 1972. This is in Chicago, so things were probably even a little more expensive there than, say, in this area. But around 50 years ago, ribeye steak was $2.49 a pound. Vanilla ice cream was $1.29 a gallon. Milk there was 89 cents a gallon. Bacon was 79 cents a pound. Coffee was 66 cents a pound. Chuck roast was 65 cents a pound. Cantaloupes were 11 cents a pound. And sweet corn you could get for 5 cents an ear. Now, and you know what? The prices will probably continue to go up on things. And we will most likely pay it. Because to us it's worth, I guess, or we're willing to pay the price of gas if we have to drive somewhere and do something. So what are we willing to pay? And then what are we willing to pay when it comes to being a disciple? There's a story of a hog and a hen who were sharing the same barnyard. And they heard about a local church's program to feed the hungry. And so the hog and hen got together and discussed it. The hen said, "I've got it. We'll provide bacon and eggs for the church to feed the hungry." Well, the hog thought about the suggestion and obviously said, "Well, there's one problem with your bacon and eggs solution. For you, it only requires a contribution. For me, it means total commitment." And that can sometimes be the cost of true discipleship. The hog was right. So I want to read some words from Jesus that talk about testing our discipleship. I want you to pay attention to these words and see how committed Jesus expects us to be as his followers. In Luke 14, verses 25 through 33, we read this. Now large crowds were going along with him, and he turned and said to them, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and his wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who observe it begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This man began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king, when he sets out to meet another king in battle, will not first sit down and consider whether he is strong enough with 10,000 men to encounter the one coming against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So then none of you can be my disciple who does not give up all his possessions." Now, let's be honest. If you read those words, those are some tough words when you just sit down and read them to hear, especially when you read them in our translation of what was actually written. Jesus says here, and he starts off this way. He says, if anyone comes to me, what do they have to do first? He said, you must hate your father, your mother, your wife, your children, your brothers, and your sisters. He didn't stop there. He then went on to even say that you must hate your own life, or we cannot be his disciples. Now, when you hear something like that, let's be honest, it makes most people want to run away from being a disciple, a follower of Jesus Christ. How many of us are willing to hate our parents, our spouses, children, our siblings, even ourselves to follow Christ? Well, the good news is you don't really have to. And before you get on to me and say I'm going against what Jesus said, just hear me out. I think one of the biggest issues with maybe people and in our world today in the Bible is that they read the Bible in our English word for word and take it just as they read it, without looking into context, without looking at the original language and what was actually meant. It's extremely difficult to translate some of the words from this Greek language that the Bible, the New Testament was written in, into our language. And that's why you get so many different types of translations to try to help people understand better. Now, when we hear somebody say they hate someone, what does that mean? You know, some people may even go so far as to say, I hate that person with a passion. You ever heard that one? Well, typically, if we say we hate someone, and I hope we're not saying that, but if we do, or if we hear someone else saying they hate someone, it often just means that we despise that person. We detest that person. We really don't like that person if we say we hate them. That's not what Jesus was saying here. Remember, this language was written in a Greek language. Very difficult to translate some of those words into the English language. Jesus is not saying to despise or detest the ones you love or yourself. In all of his teachings, that's not what he taught, was it? The word for hate that was used here in that language actually meant to love less, is what it really meant. Which makes a lot more sense. That sounds a lot more like Jesus, doesn't it? The one who told us to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Surely he doesn't want us to hate our family, friends, even ourselves to follow him. He wants us to love them less, love ourselves less than we love him. The greatest commandment of all, love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. So he wants us to love God first and then love others less just under that. So I don't want anybody going home today looking at your spouse and saying, I hate you. Well, I really just love you less, but you know what I mean. So we don't need that. Now, if we can love less of ourselves like this, love ourselves just a little less than Jesus, that's how we can be a disciple of Jesus. That's still a tough task, but it's much better than hating. So what it all really comes down to in many ways is self-denial. Are we willing to do what Jesus calls us to do? Even if it's not what we love to do, because that's often going to happen. To be a disciple means we need to be fully committed, doesn't it? So how committed are we? What price are we willing to pay for Jesus? And if you're not sure, maybe it's time we sit down, look at that mirror we've been talking about between us and God and figure that out. Because if we don't take the time to figure out how committed we really are, chances are we're not going to be committed enough to do what God calls us to do. Jesus explains it this way in those verses that I read earlier. And I'm not going to read them again. I'm going to paraphrase them a little bit. But Jesus explains it this way. That if someone were building something, say in our day and time, if you were building something, first you would want to sit down maybe and calculate first, do you even have the funds? Can you pay to get this done? Because if you don't do that, and you start building something, and then you have to stop, with just the foundation being built, people will ask you, why didn't you sit down and calculate it? Because if you do that and don't finish it, people are going to maybe make fun of us, maybe talk about us. We look foolish. He talks about it also in terms of a king in a war. Now listen, if you're going to war, and you're the leader of this nation, would you not first sit down and discuss with people or to think, Do we have the capability to defeat this other army, this other nation? And if you don't, then you may need to start some peace talks. The simple point of this lesson from Jesus in those words is that we have to be fully committed. We have to be all in if we want to be a disciple of Jesus. So look in that mirror again, and are we fully committed? Are we all in? Are we fully committed to God throughout our life, or are we just committed to God when we have enough time for God? Remember, being a disciple of Jesus is costly. It means we have to give up some things in life. I'm not going to lie, things were going pretty well for me before I came to Double Creek Church of Christ. I'm not saying they aren't now, but things were going well. I went to Bible college in the 90s, earned a degree in youth ministry preaching, but I didn't go into ministry. First, I did a couple of other jobs, and then I worked in the substance use and misuse prevention field for about 15 years. Came here on one Sunday in 2019 to fill in for someone, ended up becoming the preacher here. But I had a good job. Not perfect, like other jobs, frustrating things at times and moments, but it was good. It was a Monday through Friday job, normal hours, got to travel to some great places for work, had my weekends off, and now, to be honest, the weekends are my most hectic for time in my brain. Anyway, it's hard to shut it off. But even better than that stuff was just that particular set of hours. And when I was done for the day, I was done. Could do what I wanted to do. I could relax the brain. Stress level was much lower at that time. Things like anxiety, doubt, fear, failure, things like that, they weren't really a part of my life on a daily basis. But when you take a position like this, those things seem to constantly be beating at you. And so I had to decide if I was willing to make a commitment to go into full-time ministry. Now we all know that everyone is not meant to go into full-time ministry like that. And listen, we've loved our time here at Double Creek. I love the things that we've been doing. I've learned a lot while we're here about my time here, about myself, about people, about service, about God's church. And I don't think we're done, but let's not forget what our mission is as the Church of Christ. If we have a desire for everyone, a concern for loved ones, our friends, our family, those who are lost, that don't know Christ, that it's our responsibility to do what we can think of to win them to Jesus. Maybe we plead with them, maybe we beg with them, maybe we sit down and talk with them or pray with them. We give, and sometimes people will give all these marvelous promises that their lives will be wonderfully changed if they come to Jesus. And it's great that we have that desire in our hearts to see others come to Jesus. But we often forget that when Jesus called people, when he challenged people, he often went about it in a different way. Sometimes I think we want to make the path to Jesus as easy as we possibly can for people. But when Jesus would call people to himself as to be his disciples, and if they would begin in response to his invitation, it's like he was saying, wait, I want you to stop right there. I want you to think about this for a minute. Just really what you want to do. Before you come to me, don't you think you ought to stop and at least ask the question, how much is it going to count? How much is it going to cost? What is it really going to pay if I go all in with Jesus? What's the price tag going to be if I declare my commitment to you? That's what Jesus was really saying there in those verses from Luke 14. Like, listen, if you want to follow me, you have to love me the most, and these other people you love a little bit less. Jesus basically posted a warning there for all people that would come to him, to all who would rush to him and seek shelter under him. He basically said, hear this, anybody who comes to me and does not hate, love less his father and mother, wife and children, brother and sisters, even your own self, you cannot be my disciple. So in other words, Jesus was saying, let me tell you how much it's going to cost if you want to follow me. Let me tell you the price. If you want to come with me, I must ask you, are you willing to love less your mother? Are you willing to love your father, your brother, your sister, your wife, your children even less than me? Are you ready to love yourself less than me? And he's basically saying, because if you're not, you cannot be my disciple. They're tough words to hear, but since Jesus was the one saying these words, we better listen carefully to what he's saying to us. During World War II, some German leaders, they put together a plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. And included in that plot was a prominent clergyman and a theologian by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer was discovered, he was arrested, and he was executed by Hitler. But he wrote a book that has become something of a Christian classic. I mentioned it recently here as well, titled The Cost of Discipleship. In that book, which Bonhoeffer wrote in the 20th century, he invented the term cheap grace, which goes along with our concept of what some people might say easy Christianity, in which people say, sure, I want to be a Christian. And yes, I'll make a confession of faith. I'll get baptized. I believe that God forgives me of my sins. And yet, still live however they want to live and don't change in any way. There's a story of a woman who went to a women's center to have an abortion. She had one of those Jesus fish stickers on her car, that says you're a Christian. Someone saw it and asked, are you a Christian? And she said, yes, but I'm going to go have this abortion because I know Jesus will forgive me later. That's what Bonhoeffer was referring to when he said easy Christianity or cheap grace. Just saying that I can live however I want because all I have to do is ask for forgiveness later. Paul made it clear that we are not to go on sinning so that grace can just be increased. You see, people will choose to not be a disciple, a student, a follower, a learner of Jesus because they don't want to give up what they love. That's what it really boils down to. So to keep a lifestyle going or the way we live going, we'll believe in Jesus and then just claim the name Christian goes along with it. But what did Jesus say in the Great Commission? He didn't say go make church members. He didn't say go make Christians. He said go and make disciples. So I've said before, disciples was, I think, 269 times that word was in the New Testament. Christian is found 3 times. Because to be a Christian, you had to be a disciple. If you were a disciple, you were a Christian. So go and make disciples. So we got to get past the point where just believing that cheap grace is okay. We got to get past the point that believing and just making a one-time decision is okay. We have to move on to the understanding that we are to be disciples, even though it can be costly for us. And if we want to really see how costly it could be to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, let's look first at those disciples, the ones Jesus handpicked. And after we do this, remember that being a disciple of Jesus doesn't always make life easier for us, but it does make it better. Those 12, I mentioned them last week. I read their names from Matthew chapter 10. They were simple, ordinary men just doing regular jobs. They probably were not the types of people that I would have chosen to be the ones who were the first disciples of Jesus, to be the ones that would get to travel around with Jesus during his ministry for about 3.5 years and learn from him. And I don't think they had a clue at first what it was going to cost them. I think they were probably caught up in all the great things Jesus was doing, his great teachings, who he was. I don't think they had a clue when they started following Jesus around what it would entail for them. But after they had seen the risen Jesus, they knew exactly what they needed to do. Fulfill the command of Jesus in the Great Commission to go and make disciples. And that's just what they did. That's how the church began. That's how it thrived. That's how it spread. Just look at these 12 here quickly as we get ready to finish up. Let's go ahead and start with Judas Iscariot. Get him out of the way as quick as possible. Judas Iscariot, one of the original 12. He's the one who betrayed Jesus, had him handed over to be arrested for 30 pieces of silver. Somebody had to do this. It was prophesied about in the Old Testament. And Judas was the man. It ate him up so much, he went out and hung himself. Guilt drove him to commit suicide. But then there were the others. Let's take these others in order as the way we read them last week in Matthew chapter 10 and see what they did after Jesus left them. Understand that we don't get all this information from the Bible, but from other writings in the first century and what traditions say. For most of these, it's very interesting. Take Peter. Peter, the first one called by Jesus with his brother Andrew. He's the one that was there and Jesus said, Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. Peter's one that we can know quite a bit about after Jesus ascended back into heaven. We read a lot about him in Acts. We have a couple of letters that Peter wrote in the Bible as well. We know he preached that first gospel sermon in Acts chapter 2 on the day of Pentecost, on the day the church began. And even though he was the one that would deny Jesus 3 times, that he even knew who he was on the night he was arrested, Peter would go on to preach in places like Pontus, Galatia, Bithynia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Rome. Peter was martyred in Rome around 66 AD. He was believed to have been crucified upside down because he said he was not worthy to die crucified right side up in the way Jesus was. There's Andrew, the brother of Peter. He went on to share the gospel in what they call the land of the meat eaters, what we know today as Russia. It's said that he was crucified in Greece. Then there's James, the son of Zebedee. James is considered the first of the disciples to be martyred. We can read about his death in Acts chapter 12 and verse 2 when King Herod had him put to death by sword. And there's John, the brother of Zebedee. He's the brother of James. This is John, the writer of the Gospel of John, the book of Revelation, the writer of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. He is the only one of the 12 outside of Judas that hung himself. He's the only one of the 12 that did not die as a martyr, was not put to death because of his faith and his teachings about Jesus. Although he suffered greatly during his ministry, he had a long life. He was exiled to the island of Patmos for preaching the gospel, where he received his revelation from Christ and wrote the book of Revelation there. Eventually, they say he made it back to Ephesus, and he died an ordinary death sometime after 98 AD. Then there's Philip. Philip ministered in places like North Africa and Asia Minor. Traditions say that the Roman proconsul was so enraged that his wife was converted to Christianity by Philip that he had Philip brutally beaten to death. What about Bartholomew? We don't read a whole lot about Bartholomew in the Bible, but apparently he was someone who loved to travel, was basically a missionary. He was in India, Ethiopia, the Arabian regions. And while there are different traditions about how he died, and some of the others as well, it's certain that he died for his faith in Jesus Christ and preaching Jesus. And of course there's Thomas. We know Thomas as Thomas the Doubter because he was the one who refused to believe that Jesus had resurrected until he could see him and touch him for himself. Thomas went to Syria. He went to what we know as Iraq today. He was apparently stabbed by 4 soldiers and killed for his faith. What about Matthew, the tax collector? Certainly one that we would not have chosen, being a tax collector. The one that many just couldn't believe Jesus chose to be one of his followers. Matthew went to Iran, then to Ethiopia. It's reported that he was stabbed to death for his faith. Then there was another James, James the son of Alphaeus. He apparently went to Syria. It's believed that he was stoned and then clubbed to death for his faith. And Thaddeus. Well, supposedly he went to northern Syria, Iraq, and Turkey, where he was killed by arrows in Turkey's mountainous northern region. And then finally there was Simon the Zealot. It said he went to Persia to share the gospel. There it's believed that he was sawn in half. No matter how you look at it, those original disciples of Jesus, the ones he gave the Great Commission to, were all in. And there are some different traditions about how some of them died, but it is clear that they all died because of their faith in preaching that Jesus is the Christ. When you think about some of the places they went to, think about those nations right now. Iran, Iraq, Syria, Russia, that area. Those are places where you could go today and still be tortured, be persecuted, be imprisoned, maybe even put to death for preaching Jesus Christ. But that's what they were willing to do because they were all in to go and make disciples. They were willing to pay the price no matter what, even though it meant costing them their life. Of the original 12, Judas hung himself, as I said. John was the only one who did not die as a martyr for his faith, but he still had it rough. And the others, well, every one of them, including John, went out and made disciples. They paid the ultimate price, they did, for sharing the gospel. The cost of being a disciple. It may not cost us like it did those original disciples. We may not have to travel all over the world preaching the gospel, knowing that at any moment we could be arrested, have our lives taken from us, or tortured, or anything. We may not have to deal with all those things, but we do know that it will cost us this. If we want to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, we have to love ourselves, our family, and our friends less than Jesus. Hard to do. The cost of being a disciple. It's typically the one thing that keeps people from wanting to become a disciple. Because we just don't want to give up what we love. So let's get away from the easy Christianity or the cheap grace that Bonhoeffer wrote about and move towards being all in, fully committed disciples of Jesus Christ no matter the cost. I want to thank you for joining us here this morning. As we continue this next week, the plan is to look at one of those original ones and see who they were, what they did, what they became throughout their life, and as we continue this series. But it's very evident and clear. Being a disciple of Jesus Christ can cost us things. It means we have to stop doing some things. We have to give up some things. And it's not saying that we have to stop doing just the sinful things in life, but sometimes we have to cut out some things just to make more room for Jesus. They all did it. That's how the church thrived. That's how it spread out. If you remember in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, Jesus told them that they would be his witnesses in all Judea, in all Jerusalem, in all Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. They were the ones who started it. And ever since then, look at how far the gospel has spread. So I want to thank you for joining us here this morning for our service. Being a disciple of Jesus Christ is the most important thing we can do in life, being a follower of Jesus. If you've never made that decision to put your faith in Jesus Christ, to trust him, to confess him before others, to repent, to be immersed in the waters of baptism, to have your sins washed away, but to be a disciple, a student, a learner, a follower of Jesus after that. If you've never made that decision, you always have that opportunity. Reach out to us. Let's make that happen. If you've made that decision, you realize that I'm not following as closely as I need to. That may be the time we need to look in a mirror and just say, what do I need to change? What do I need to do different? We're going to stand and sing our hymn of invitation here this morning. Our hymn of invitation is going to be the first and last words of song number 221, Almost Persuaded, Now to Be.